This is how fish became frogs. In this video, we'll explore how a small group of fish, with the help of God Almighty, transformed into the semi-aquatic group we now call amphibians, and we'll talk about all the intermediate forms that appeared during their evolution. We are now about 380 million years ago in the oceans of the late Devonian, and you are a flesh-finned fish. Eustenopteron, and you are a very special fish indeed compared to most fishes. Your fins have an articulation with bones like the femur and tibia you possess. The first nostrils in history, and you are the first vertebrate to possess bone marrow. You could live in both saltwater and freshwater, which will be very important in the future of your distant cousins. Like many of your cousins, you already have the ability to breathe out of water thanks to your swimming bladder. Let us move away from the oceans and rivers of the late Devonian and paddle together in the shallow estuaries of this period, and this time you are Panderichthys, one of the very first tetrapodomorphs. So, tetrapodomorphs are the group including tetrapods, basically all animals with 4 legs, and their ancestors. Compared to your cousin Eustenopteron, your skull is much flatter. You do not have a dorsal fin. Your humerus is longer and your swim bladder is more efficient, allowing you to survive in periods when the water contains very little oxygen, a very common situation during the end of the Devonian. You were a hunter with a body ranging from 1 to 2 meters long, and your menu most often included the ancestors of flies, other fish with fleshy fins, and generally all sorts of small animals. After a few million years, you became a new species, Tiktaalik. Although you still resemble your ancestor Panderichthys in appearance, you possess some notable differences. Indeed, your ribcage was thicker, allowing it to support your weight during your rare movements on land, and you are also the very first vertebrate to possess a neck. You lived in the shallow rivers of the late Devonian 375 million years ago, and you were quite large, with sizes ranging from 1 to 3 meters long, and you were a predator with sharp teeth, feeding on small animals attracted to the primitive vegetation of that period. In a few million years, you or your cousins will undergo vast bodily changes until becoming Acanthostega 365 million years ago, a tetrapodomorph about 60 centimeters long. Unlike your ancestor Tiktaalik, you no longer possess fins, but true legs with 8 digits on each, useful for paddling and carrying away organic debris that was common in the waters of that period. Indeed, you were still a very predominantly aquatic organism, with your legs still unable to support your weight on dry land. But one of your cousins, Ichthyostega, could use its limbs in a rudimentary way to move on land. It had a stronger spine and ribcage than yours and possessed 7 toes on each foot, moving like a seal on the edge of rivers to potentially sunbathe or eat insects that had just come out of the water. While in the aquatic environment, Ichthyostega moved mostly using its caudal fin. But your quiet life will come to an abrupt end when 359 million years ago, the Devonian extinction, which was already progressing before, enters its final phase. And it will eventually take the lives of between 35 and 50% of marine animals, causing the disappearance of the majority of primitive tetrapodomorphs, paving the way for the very first true tetrapods. Indeed, in the period following the Carboniferous, which spans from 358 to 28 million years ago, your Devonian ancestors gave birth to you, Perderpes, the first fully terrestrial tetrapod. Compared to your ancestors, you had legs capable of supporting your weight on land while walking, and you had 5 digits, a characteristic that would be perpetuated in all future tetrapods, none naturally having more than 5 digits. Although you still depended on the aquatic environment for your life, living in the wet marshes of what is now Scotland, you were at the top of the terrestrial food chain, feeding on all kinds of insects and fish, only being threatened by certain giant arthropods that crawled in the jungles of the Carboniferous, or by the rhizodonts, a group of gigantic tetrapodomorphs. Your descendants will then divide into 2 major groups of tetrapods, the reptiliomorphs, comprising all tetrapods closer to amniotes than to amphibians, and the batrachomorphs, comprising tetrapods closer to modern amphibians than to amniotes, reptiles, mammals, etc. We batrachomorphs, in turn, include in our ranks 2 large subgroups, the temnospondyls and the lepospondyls. The temnospondyls are an order composed of tetrapods with an amphibian lifestyle which, unlike modern amphibians, were much larger and possessed scales, claws, and even osteoderms. In fact, many of them looked most like modern crocodiles. This group yours during the period following the Carboniferous. The Permian will greatly diversify with your distant cousin Eriops, an ancestral amphibian that lived on the shores of rivers, ponds, and lakes of the lower Permian. hunting all kinds of aquatic and terrestrial animals, and similarly like modern crocodiles, it measured 1 to 3 meters in length. And unlike crocodiles, instead of hatching from shelled eggs buried in the sand, the birth of euryphs happened like that of modern salamanders, although with a much slower growth rate. After euryphs, millions of years will pass, and the Permian extinction. Watch the linked video if you want to know more. Will exterminate 95% of marine species and wipe out more than 70% of terrestrial species. But curiously, the temnospondyls will not be so affected, and in the following period, the Triassic, they will reach their peak in diversity, with some members reaching very large sizes, such as Mastodontosaurus, a temnospondyl that lived in the Middle Triassic in the rivers and lakes of what is now Europe. It had a flattened skull like those of crocodiles and literally had a third eye. Its main characteristic was its size. Indeed, this monster could reach up to 6 meters in length, which probably made it a formidable predator, feeding on all kinds of fish, attacking them by ambush. But not all temnospondyls followed this path, because some, guided by Allah like the Trematosaurs, adapted to the marine environment, a very rare adaptation for amphibians. In general, over millions of years, temnospondyls will become increasingly dependent on the aquatic environment, living almost their entire lives inside it. At the end of the Triassic, the order will greatly lose diversity, with only 2 lineages passing into the Jurassic, the following period. The brachiopods and trematosaurs mentioned previously survived until the early Cretaceous, before becoming extinct forever. On the other side of the prehistoric amphibian tree, your cousins the leptonspondyls are a group of much smaller primitive amphibians with an anatomy most often resembling a small lizard or salamander, with a generally light anatomy. Among them were some bizarre members such as the Istopoda, the Adolopsondiles, and the Lysorophians, primitive amphibians that looked very much like snakes, the Microsaurians that looked very much like salamanders or newts, and the Nectrids that also looked like salamanders. All these groups lived in the Carboniferous marshes, living a largely aquatic life, with diversity reaching its peak around 300 million years ago, but shortly after the early Permian. Their diversity began to decline with the aridification of the planet during this period. The last known lepospondyl was a Microsaurian, Diplocolus, the best known genus of lepospondyl. Indeed, its boomerang-shaped head and small slender limbs set it apart from other amphibians. It measured 1 meter in length and lived in the marshes of the late Permian period. Its skull could have had a defensive function, or even a hydrodynamic function. But like all members of his group, he became extinct at the end of the Permian period. You, as the first amphibian, will appear at the beginning of the following period, the Triassic, from ancestor temnospondyls or lepospondyls, although evidence points to a temnospondyl origin with the Disaurophoidea group. A group of temnospondyls superficially resembling modern amphibians, but no matter who your ancestors are, here you are, the very first known true amphibian, Triadobatrachus. Like modern frogs, you have atrophied ribs, as well as a very well-developed tibia and fibula. You lived in the wetlands of what is now Madagascar. As a small amphibian of barely 10 centimeters in length, you had to regularly dodge the temnopsondyle predators of the time, which range in size from 30 centimeters to 2 meters in length. However, you could not jump as well as your distant ancestors, the frogs, who only did so to escape from their many predators, and you had a tail that allowed you to move easily in the aquatic environment. Alongside you, during the late Triassic period around 20 million years ago, your cousins, the Urodeles salamanders and newts, had appeared with a specimen named Triosaurus, unlike your more compact anatomy. God had chosen to keep their anatomy similar to that of most primitive temnospondyls and leponspondyls. It lived in what is now Kyrgyzstan, living a strongly aquatic lifestyle like you. However, unlike you, it was probably neotenic, remaining in larval form even in adulthood, which probably allowed it to possess gills in adulthood, as do modern axolotls. From your ancestor Triadobatrachus, during the Jurassic period, the first true frog, Prosalirus, was born. You had now completely lost your tail and were able to jump like your modern cousins. In the Cretaceous period, when the Indian continent and the island of Madagascar formed one gigantic island, lived one of your fiercest descendants, Bedzebufo, a frog that measured between 40 and 20 centimeters long. So at its largest, it could have been as big as a cat. Like most modern frogs, it was a predator, feeding on any animal that could fit in its mouth, and given its size, it could probably have eaten small dinosaurs or juveniles that were spawn-killed by this frog. Meanwhile, your cousins, the salamanders, were living their golden age, But everything came to a halt when, 66 million years ago, a large meteorite ended the reign of the dinosaurs and launched planet Earth into a new era. In fact, it was only during the Cenozoic that you and your cousins became very widespread, taking advantage of all the ecological niches left vacant by primitive amphibians and lizards to become the forms we know today. During the Cenozoic, the Albanerpetontidae group, distant cousins of salamanders, thrived. They had skin covered in scales and were relatively tolerant of dry environments for an amphibian, generally resembling a lizard. Nowadays, you frogs comprise 59 families spread across all continents except Antarctica, mostly in tropical forests. You are characterized by a robust body without a tail, large eyes and limbs folded on your body optimized for jumping. A large part of you secrete toxic substances on your skin to make yourselves absolutely disgusting to predators. You are mostly predators of animals ranging from insects to small mammals and reptiles that live as adults in fresh water on land or even underground or in trees for some species. In the larval stage, you are a tadpole, a larva with an elongated oval body possessing a caudal fin. As a tadpole, with your keratin beak, you will pursue a herbivorous diet for the most part. Unlike adults, at this stage of your life, you breathe with gills on the side of your body. At the end of the tadpole stage, your body begins to change. Within 24 hours, due to a hormone called thyroxine, your lungs develop and your gills disappear, your jaw develops, your legs develop, and your tail shortens until it disappears sometime later. After this rapid puberty, depending on the species, you will either stay in fresh water or migrate to a terrestrial environment. Many of you catch your prey with your sticky tongues, while others swallow them whole. Among you, some species stand out. For example, Nasica batrachus, sahiadrensis, literally lives underground, only coming out of its hole during the rainy season to reproduce for 2 weeks, and on top of that, it is extremely ugly. Another unusual species is the jaguar frog, a member of the poison dart frog family. It's found mainly in Venezuela and northern Brazil, in the trees of tropical rainforests. The tadpoles often hatch from eggs laid on leaves and kept moist by the male. When they hatch, the male literally carries the tadpoles on his back, which is rather hilarious. Wow! Then they are placed in small ponds, tree hollows, or even in hollow leaves containing water, such as bromeliad leaves. The tadpoles feeding on decomposing plants and small animals take 70 to 90 days to metamorphose. As adults, jaguar tree frogs feed on ants and other toxic insects, which in their natural state makes them extremely toxic, rendering them totally immune to predators. Moreover, their bright yellow color signals their danger to predators. Like some orthopterans, male poison dart frogs sing with their throats, and the female chooses the male she prefers. Still in South America, the Suriname toad is even more bizarre. Indeed, this species, which has evolved to resemble a dead leaf in adulthood, has an extremely bizarre reproductive cycle. After mating, the female implants the eggs in the skin of her back. The skin will eventually cover the eggs entirely. The embryos will continue to grow in their mother's back, even becoming tadpoles, and then, during their metamorphosis, they will emerge from their mother's back as small frogs. Then, after giving birth, the layer of skin used to shelter the tadpoles will fall off in adulthood. This toad will live most of the time in the aquatic environment, gobbling up small fish, crustaceans, and insects. Sometimes climbing onto dry land, which is incredible. So there you have it. Okay, I know you're waiting for me to talk about salamanders and caecilians, but these are such complex groups that they deserve their own video. So I'll probably talk about them in the rest of this video, which will be released in about 2 to 4 weeks. Anyway, if you like this video, you can always check out the videos that will be posted right here.